Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Underwater Photography Show. I'm Matthew Sullivan.
And I'm Alex Mustard.
And today we're going to talk about the results of the GDT European Wildlife Photographer of the Year results, which were just announced. So this is separate from the Wildlife Photographer of the Year. But it's a big deal in Europe, I would imagine. I have
Yeah,
never entered this one because I think you have to be a member if you're not European.
yes, that is correct. And that's probably its biggest, one of its biggest differences from the wildlife photographer. I would say for the European community, the two often come out only a few days apart. This year they're about 10 days apart, but they often come out in the same week. And they feature often a lot of the same images. There's always quite a big overlap because the two competitions run at the same time. You do quite regularly, and the majority of photographers out there enter the same pictures into both. So there's lots of pictures in this that are in the wildlife photographer and vice versa. The GDT usually announces after the wildlife photographer. I don't know whether that's slightly a respectful thing, not trying to steal their thunder or anything. The GDT, it is open only to European citizens, so people who live in Europe, or to people who choose to pay to be members of the GDT organization. So you can enter from anywhere in the world, and it basically costs you a bit more. But generally, it means it's a European thing. The competition, though, I think stylistically, despite the overlap in winners with the wildlife photographer, does set out to be looking more for fresh, creative visions of wildlife more than, and it certainly has, I think, a bit less photojournalism style photography than the main wildlife photographer of the year. I thought I was actually a good way to introduce it. I was actually going to read the judge's comment about it this year from Bruno De Misis, the Italian photographer. He goes, over time, judging nature photography competitions has become increasingly difficult. In the recent past, this form of photography has become massively popular. Hundreds of thousands of enthusiasts worldwide have access to endless set of fabulous opportunities and cutting-edge technologies, which in turn allow for truly unprecedented images. There are more and more beautiful, sensational photographs around. The standard bar has never been so high. At the same time, the increasing popularity of certain subjects or particular techniques has also led to emulation, and strong personal voices can end up lost in a world of photographs which all look the same. That's why the jury for the 25th edition of the European Wildlife Photographer of the Year had a particularly difficult task. Judges Bruno, Aaron Kukowski, who many people know as Bertie, Serena Ho, Rosamund Kidman-Cox, and Agorastas Papasanis, whose name I always struggle with, but you'll know his mushroom photography if you've spent any time looking at nature photography over the last 10 years, had to select 90 images from a pool of 25,000 submissions. In this huge collection of incredibly good photographs, the jury searched for novel subjects and fresh vision, where photographic skill combined with compelling content and where powerful message was delivered with clear photographic intentions. In our opinion, those fabulous images highlight both the fragile wonders of nature and the troublesome times we live in, and thus can help trigger deeper reflection within the viewer. I think that last part was the reason I wanted to read that out, was particularly some of the thoughtfulness of the words. I think we spent a lot of time going round about, what the sort of pictures that should win these competitions. And I think this, is particularly well written by Bruno, saying, they're not just looking for a wow picture. They're looking for something that they feel is fresh and original, because when you see 25,000 pictures, you see a lot of repetition, even though photographers may not realize that they're doing the same thing as someone else, because, and I think that is quite interesting. And that they're looking for, particularly like that last sentence where it says with clear photographic intentions, where there's this feeling that what the photographer has done visually is working in sync with what they're trying to communicate. And I think a lot of the time as underwater photographers, we are prone to just throwing our box of tricks at the subject and seeing what sticks. And I think what they're saying is they'd like us to be trying more to have a vision for what we want to say about the subject, and ultimately to use the right techniques to show that, rather than simply showing how good a magician we are. Anyway.
I've generally over the years preferred the GDT, and I think part of this ties into what was said there at the end of the little blurb. And it's, or what kind of what you said maybe at the beginning, where there's less photojournalism and more, it's more, they reward artistic images more. It's about the photographic merit of a picture, not necessarily just the content or the message per se. So typically my taste generally seems to be that I prefer the results of GDT, even though it's not as grand a competition. I don't know that this year I would agree with that, but
Mm.
generally I seem to prefer this competition and the winners from it than I do the wildlife photography.
And we're talking in general, both the
Yeah, yeah,
the
yeah.
terrestrial and the underwater pictures. It's when we did our wildlife photographer one, we kind of, because we edited it down because we spoke too long about the general views. It wasn't quite clear enough that we were talking about the underwater ones there. I would say, yeah, this year is a little bit different. I think the wildlife photographer of the year was particularly strong this year overall. I thought it was actually one of the strongest sets. I know you didn't find it as impressive as I did, but I thought it was a really strong. Of course, there were some weird ones in there, but overall, I thought generally it was a very strong collection this year overall. But I thought the underwater was particularly disappointing. There were relatively few underwater images awarded. They were particularly narrow in their style, and there just weren't any in there that I felt in 5 to 10 years time are going to be in my memory. There were, there was plenty of worthy. Yep, that's worthy of a tick. That's worthy of a gong. It's a good. It's of the level to be awarded. But they didn't feel there was anything there that for me was particularly iconic. I feel that the underwater ones in GDT this year, they probably have a similar standard to the wildlife photographer. Plenty that are of the standard, but there's a little bit more range and diversity in them. And so I would say I prefer the underwater ones to the wildlife photographer. But overall, I thought the wildlife photographer probably is ahead this year than GDT, just because it was a particularly strong year from the wildlife photographer. So I
Fair
don't know
enough.
if I made enough sense there. Should we pull up the underwater
We
pictures?
should, we should. Everyone wants to see them anyway.
Yeah, right. Let me get them up. There we go. Should be on the screen now. And I think this is our first one, which is the winner of the underwater category. I can read the name if I put my mouse like that. Which was taken by Angel Fitor from Spain. Unsung Heroes. This is a photo that's already been around quite a bit, and I always find it, a bit disappointing when a competition that I really rate has a picture that I've seen before. And this was a winner earlier in the year, I think April, May time. I can't remember if that's before GDT was judged or after. And this is a picture that was awarded in the Environmental Photographer of the Year competition, Environmental Photographer Award competition, which is organised by the Prince Albert II of Monaco Foundation. And that was the overall winner of that competition, so it isn't a secret shot. And I always find that a bit disappointing. I really enjoy the image. I think it's a very clever shot with I think it's a very well engineered shot. There's a lot of interest in these unsung hero species at the moment, and doing a photographically interesting take on them with these two, hills of worm hills, both blowing out at the same time, which is quite unusual to capture, and also both being lit by spotlights in the picture, I think is really quite an interesting take. I am, surprised, however, given the fact that the picture had already been awarded, and I'm assuming that that was before this was judged, that it was judged as the category winner. But it's a well engineered picture for, I feel, what the contests are looking for. This celebration of something weird from the underwater world, something that's got photographic creativity, and is also around perhaps the less well known, less obviously charismatic species. So it's a good contest shot from all those points of view.
So I think this one I actually slightly differ from you on. I love this picture. I've really enjoyed it since the first time I saw it. And I think this was actually, I don't remember if the first time I saw it was when it came out during the environmental awards, or if he put this on Instagram before that. But I've always liked Angel. That's how you say his name, I think. Angel's work. I think it's really unique, and his lighting it stands out. Whenever you see a picture of his, it's his just based on the lighting. And I think that says a lot about a photographer. And it's, what I think is cool about it is how he's taken a species that I swim over, 50 of these every dive I do here locally, and I've never once even thought about photographing one. and he has not only photographed them, but he's done it in a really interesting, in my opinion, way. And like you said, getting them both exhaling at the same time. That's yeah, I can't imagine this was an easy shot to pull off, both in terms of the timing of it and in terms of the technicalities of it, of lighting it like that. So I like this one. This one is probably one that I will remember in 5 or 10 years. So but I think the rest of them I probably agree with you on in this category. They're all nice, but I don't know that they're memorable or will stick with me quite the way this one does.
Yeah, and maybe that was, once they got down to this top 10 or however many there are, maybe maybe it had already won the other competition, but the judges were kind of, well, this is the category winner,
Yeah.
of what's left. Right, let's move on because we've got quite a lot to get through. Next up is an interesting behavior shot of a grass snake being eaten by tadpoles. I think it's the behavior here, and and again shining a light on unusual species. A freshwater shot. I think there's a decent balance between marine and freshwater in this category. It's not as dominated by freshwater or as the wildlife photographer was. This picture isn't a beautiful picture, but it shows an interesting behavior, and again is shining that spotlight on the less charismatic species. Although grass snakes are quite charismatic, but it's the tadpoles I think are not so much.
Yeah. So this one for me, Angel's picture feels more like GDT to me. This one feels more like the type of thing that wildlife photographer would award, where it's an interesting behavior. Like it's perfectly fine in terms of its execution, but as a photograph, it doesn't. From an artistic perspective, it doesn't blow me away. But it is cool to see the tadpoles, as the title of the picture states, with the roles reversed, where they're feeding on what is normally their predator. People think of tadpoles as just sucking on little bits of algae or whatever it is, but they will go after whatever they can get their mouth on, whether that be a snake or algae or scum on the top of a rock. And some species of tadpoles, going to nerd out here, will actually cannibalize each other if they have nothing else to eat. So not as cute and cuddly as they may look.
Yeah, yeah. I feel this one. I mean, I understand. I know the behavior. I think is interesting. I think the title of it is a good one. In that, I think that helps it a lot, and it might be a case that that title helped it appeal to the judges. I find it photographically very drab. It doesn't pull me in. This behavior I find really interesting, but I don't feel like this is the best shot you could have got of the behavior. I can't see half the tadpoles in this picture properly.
Yeah.
So that surprises me, that it doesn't feel like a particularly well photographically executed way of telling this story. So I was surprised by this one, especially being second in the category.
I think if you had taken just that where all the action is happening, just take the face of the snake and that main cluster of tadpoles, make that your frame, it might have been a much more interesting image than, because the whole right half of it is pretty, nothing's really going on, and all
Yeah,
of the interest is in that one corner.
yeah, and they didn't have, I don't think, a specialist underwater judge in this particular one. So yeah, so maybe that's right. Let's move on to the next one. This is much more easier to appreciate. An amazing image with two of the most amazing marine creatures in the frame, and behavior and action, of an orca and a humpback whale feeding on herring in Norway, I assume. There is a great feeling of action in the picture. Perhaps not peak of the action. It kind of feels like, it looks like the pectoral fin of the whale is kind of cut off. The bottom one doesn't, feel. I mean, obviously it's likely to be a grab shot. This is very fast action, but nonetheless, I think a very worthy picture. I can very much understand why this is awarded. It's full of action, very dramatic, and yeah, it's the sort of thing you expect to see. Big animals doing cool stuff in these
Yeah,
categories, and yeah, I like it a lot.
I do too. I think the orca the orca having eye contact with the camera is fantastic, and having been in the water in Norway when humpbacks come crashing through a bait ball, and you're doing your best just to take pictures. This one's remarkable in terms of a grab shot, because
Mm.
the ones I got were truly atrocious and never made it off the camera. So the fact that he not only got a cool grab shot but managed to have the orca in there as well is really, really cool. And you can see all the little bait fish splitting from the humpback, which is nice as well. It gives you some more action. You can just see how chaotic that environment is, and that's it. It is. It's not a calm place, despite how placid orcas and humpbacks can seem to be when they're just cruising around.
Yeah,
When they're on the hunt, that's what they're doing.
Yeah, I think if he got this perfect, it could have been actually a real challenger for the category win. And I think not being perfect, I think it's very, very deserving as a commended entry. Right, this next one, it doesn't have a name on, but
it's Christoph Taula.
Yeah, this one is a comb jellyfish. I have to say this one leaves me scratching my head as to why it's awarded. This feels like, my first Blackwater shot. Not mine, as in my first, as in, you give a kid a camera and say, go and do a Blackwater dive, and this is what you get on your first dive. I don't quite understand the appeal of this, and I think this is one of those situations where perhaps not having a specialist underwater judge, you just got the judges going, oh, wow, this is pretty. None of us know what it is. Isn't that exciting? We should award it. And I think, I think a little bit more specialist expertise might have seen someone going, this is commonplace. Because certainly if you read through what Bruno said about the judging and about them looking for innovative vision, this doesn't appeal to me. I'm going to move us on because I don't see any point in hearing you say
I wasn't going to add anything new to that.
So. Here we've got a freshwater trout in the river, and Queen of the Piave. Yeah. This is,
I didn't know you read it.
So I think there's nothing wrong with this image, but I don't think this comes close to the freshwater imagery that the wildlife photographer had, particularly Isaac's pictures. They were just kind of a whole nother level. And I think that part of that is the difference, but I think technique-wise, it's kind of the same to some degree. It's just the difference between subject matter between a clear stream in Europe compared to a clear stream in the States. Just the amazing life that you have there. But of course, the pictures don't have to come from Europe for this competition. So I'm surprised this is awarded. I don't feel that there's really... I mean, it feels just like a snapshot of that environment. It doesn't feel particularly composed. It doesn't feel particularly revealing of anything in terms of story. So I find this one quite a surprising one as well. So this one and the previous one leave me a bit cold.
I like the environment, but I wish the subject was either doing something more interesting or more prominent in the frame. Because if you had that environment and you had a subject doing something interesting, or you had it, taking up a substantial portion of your frame, maybe have it profile and up off the bottom, something like that, it would be more interesting. But I agree with you, it feels snapshotty to me. And I would agree. They do swim most of the time. They're swimming.
You can't get them doing stuff.
Yeah. But I agree. I think compared to images like Isaac's, I think Isaac had interesting behavior, especially in the turtle picture. Even though the environment was similar, and his was very well composed with what seemed like a purposeful composition
and a special moment.
This one it's okay.
Yeah, right. This is another picture by Angel, and I actually don't know what this is, and it's very rare that we have pictures in and anything. Obviously, it's so yeah. I'm not quite sure what we're looking at. It's visually quite interesting and appealing. Cycle of life doesn't really tell me very much. There's some jellyfish in the background. Could this be a larval or a benthic stage of a jellyfish? I don't know. So I'm not quite sure what's going on here.
Yeah, but it's big if it's a benthic stage, and it doesn't look like the other ones. Initially, when I first saw it, I was like, "Oh, it's a jellyfish being eaten by something," but all that's there is seagrass, unless there's something else holding it down in the sand.
If you can't see what it is, surely that's not the point of the image. So
I don't know.
I think you have to buy the book to get the information on what the pictures are.
Visually, though, it is cool. I like the sun rays. I like all the jellyfish in the background. I like the environment. I just wish I knew what I was looking at.
Yeah, yeah. So yeah, it leaves me scratching my visually. Like you say, it's not an unattractive image. The lighting on the grass, particularly, is very sympathetic. The sun rays are very nice. The jellyfish in the background are nice, but yeah, I'm not I'm not quite sure what it is. So yeah, it's not a good start, right? Um, this picture I really like. It's a picture, presumably in the Philippines, from the type of anemone fish it is, and it's by Romeo Bodalai from Hungary, I think. I think I really like the moodiness of the lighting. I think it creates a really unusual and different effect. Just how the snoot light has caught this scene and created a predominantly low key effect with interesting details, and I find that interesting and original. And again, this is one that for me, I can very much understand why it's been awarded. It's original, different, tells a nice behavioural story. Those are all things you'd look for in a winning shot.
I love the lighting on the right side of the frame. My only wish is I wish the left snoot had been raised up a little bit higher to catch a bit more of the top eggs and a bit more of the face of the fish. I mean, that's a minor gripe, but I do love the lighting overall, and it's a cool behavior. And like you said, it's easy to see why, if they're looking for unusual aesthetics underwater, why they awarded this one. And my gripe is very minor. I just wish the snoot were a little bit higher, because clearly he used double snoots for this. So maybe it wasn't possible either. Maybe this was real quick and he had been set up for something else. I don't know.
Yeah, right. This one by Ole Jorgen Liden from Norway, of these royal penguins, and I think this is quite a striking image. I don't think it doesn't feel totally perfectly composed. I wonder if it was shot with a pole cam rather than with someone in the water with it. I don't know, but the three penguins in the middle are very striking. The kelp on the surface is also really appealing. I really like the final penguin in the distance behind. I'm not so keen on the one exiting on the right, or the flipper being cut on the one on the bottom. But I particularly like the other two penguins, and the one behind are very strong. And penguins underwater, that is a compelling subject, unusual to see, and you can see why a picture like this is successful, for those reasons.
I don't think I'd ever even heard of this species, much less seen a picture of one, especially underwater. So that's pretty cool. I'm bummed the bottom flipper is cut off on that one, but what I do like is that each of those three penguins, the flipper is in a slightly more progressed
Yeah.
state. So the one's down and midway up, then all the way perpendicular. So I think that's really cool. And like you said, seeing penguins underwater, especially an unusual species of penguin, I think is probably always going to have a good chance whatever competition you entered in, as long as it's pretty close to being technically correct. And that last penguin on the left side helps fill the frame. And I actually normally would mind the butt penguin on the right side, but for whatever reason it doesn't bother me in this one. Maybe because it's not overly prominent.
I think there's that transition, isn't there? There's a whole conveyor belt of them coming through.
Yeah, so you can kind of feel that he just caught a moment in time as they all blow by.
Yeah, but
I imagine it's a difficult shot.
Sorry, Matt.
But sorry. Go ahead.
And I think that one of the things you look for in wildlife photography competitions is people showing you things you haven't seen before. And we have seen lots of pictures of penguins. This sort of environment is more unusual. This species is more unusual. It has a different aesthetic, different feel, while still being visually compelling. So yeah, I think this is a decent, another one that is a very clear, easy to understand why it was awarded. This one by Andrea Michelutti from Italy, Sea of Fire, with this pretty shrimp lit from through the coral from the back, and revealing this big clutch of eggs. Again, I think the photos really putting emphasis on the eggs, and I think the judges have sort of enjoyed that extra bit of behavior in the picture. It's nice to see sort of color and vibrancy as well. It's a big part of the underwater world, so it's good to see that in a picture. I'm not convinced this is the world's greatest shrimp picture I've ever seen. But there's nothing. I haven't got any major criticism of it. I don't find it a wow shot, but I do think what I like about it is that the technique is highlighting the behavior. The backlighting technique through the coral is helping you really notice and appreciate the behavior, which is the shrimp carrying the eggs. So I think from that perspective, I think it does fit what the judges were saying they were looking for in that, consistency of vision and technique.
Yeah, it's not technique for technique's sake. It's technique to help make the picture better. And I like this one. I do like the backlight. I think the shrimp is cool. Uh, if I was nitpicking, and maybe this wasn't possible to do, would be to have moved slightly more to the right to get a more perfectly perpendicular or parallel, whichever one, angle on the shrimp, so its face isn't quite hidden by that claw. And then you might have more even backlight, and that shadow on the right hand side might not be as prominent. But I think it's a cool animal and cool behavior. And like we've said a couple times now, it seems to be a lot of what the big competitions are going for. So it's definitely understandable why they chose it.
And I think really interesting when you have like no underwater judge in a contest. I think it makes for really quite interesting because it gives you a real insight into what the top land nature photographers see in underwater pictures. And that is a big help when it comes to entering your underwater pictures in other wildlife competitions, because the panels are always going to be dominated by those sorts of people. This picture here is by Ferenc Lawrence, whose name I always struggle with, from Hungary. The kiss, these two carp interacting. You've got two good fish really interacting, and the sunbeams above it. I think we had this shot in UPY either this year or a previous year. And UPY, we allow photographers to take backscatter out of their pictures. And I just always assumed this was cleaned up because the water doesn't look that clear. You'd imagine this environment would be full of particles. But I'm pretty sure GDT doesn't allow backscatter removal. So he obviously shot this picture as clean as this, because they would have checked the raw files and everything, and they're pretty strict. So I'm especially impressed that he got such a clean image in relatively murky water. It catches a moment, it catches some fish. It's not the world's most, important bit of behavior. It's just the interaction of two individuals. But, it's compelling. They're charismatic subjects, and I can see why it's done well.
So this one I think has also been an ocean art and something else too, maybe DPG. So it's interesting it's still being awarded, but it is a cool picture. I love the sun rays. I like the expression on the fish who's being mouthed, because he's kind of looking like, what the hell are you doing? I wish the lighting were a bit more on the face or the faces of the fish, and because it leaves them a little bit in shadow. But that's I assume this was a quick action shot that he wasn't fully set up or prepared for, which makes that critique.
I'm surprised the rules don't allow you to do a little bit of brightening and darkening as well.
Maybe they do. I don't know. I don't know. But yeah, it's cool. This goes back to what we've talked about before, where pictures that have made the rounds, this one for what seems like literal years, are still being awarded in big competitions. And I've had a picture or two do the same thing, but it just seems odd to me that you would have thought that these, especially this picture, because it's been seen a lot.
But it's only been in underwater contests, and if you don't have an underwater judge, who's going to know? Right, I'm going to roll us on. There's a couple. These are from outside the underwater categories, but underwater pictures. This one is called Two Worlds by Jonas again. I like the ice in this one and the feeling. It's not really an underwater shot. It's taken from in the water, but the subject matter of attraction really is above the water. But it's a good. I think this is a sort of a clever bit of contest entering. In that, I think if you entered this shot in an underwater photography competition, it wouldn't get anywhere. But in a bird category of a wildlife competition where, there's amazing pictures of birds flying and on sticks, or whatever, a picture of a bird doing something completely different is a great way to have success. So I think this is worthy to talk about, not photographically, but because it's a good bit of contest entering. Because it's, this will really stand out in a bird category.
Yeah. I also do like the picture. I like the ice because usually when you see the petrel pictures, it's just open water and there's nothing else really happening.
Mm.
I like the feet and I like his expression because I've been
Yeah,
in the
yeah.
water when petrels come at you and they can be very in your face and they'll come in and just peck your head if you're not paying attention. And so he caught this one looking
Looking to
looking
peck
like
his
he
head.
was up to no good. Yeah.
Yeah.
But so I like the picture as a picture, but I agree. It was like you said, it's a clever bit of contest entering to put a bird in the water in the in the bird category instead of the underwater category.
Yeah, and I think they do get a lot of birds in the water, but it tends to be cormorants hunting bait fish around
Mhm.
Los Islotes Islands.
Yeah.
And I think that goes in the we've seen it before category. And I think the gannets days are done now. I think there's a lot of reaction against. I mean, one of the photography podcasts that you appeared on relatively recently, I
Yeah.
know that they consider gannets underwater as one of the photographic cliches of bird photography. So,
Yeah.
if that's how the bird community is looking at those shots, it's about finding something different, right? And then our final one was the winner of the other animals category, which is a salamander, or it's a newt probably, shot up through a load of what looks to me, I know you're like frog spawn rather than newt eggs.
Yeah. This one looks iffy to me.
Mm,
I mean, I've seen newts and frogs and salamanders obviously all mate in the same ponds, but I've never seen a salamander perched so nicely in amongst frog eggs. And of course, not saying that it can't happen, but this is one of those times where you would think the judges would err on the side of caution and maybe like, I don't know about this, especially with things like amphibians, which are so easy to relocate if people wanted to do that. I've seen frogs sitting in obviously
mm.
clusters of frog spawn in something similar to this. So I'm not saying this can't happen, but there's been a whole host of, in my opinion, very blatantly posed underwater amphibian and reptile images in the last 5 or so years in competitions. Um,
I think
so
the
every time,
difficulty is that if
sorry,
you're a marine expert, which is what most underwater specialist judges would be, you almost know nothing about these creatures. And maybe the message to send out to people is, if these pictures are in your winners, before you announce the winners, maybe get some expert insight on them.
yeah,
Because, like you say, if you've got a picture of a fish, chances are no one moved the fish for the shot. It's pretty hard to move a fish.
yeah.
Whereas, newt, salamanders, frogs, and toads are relatively easy to move for a shot. So be a little bit more suspicious about those pictures. I really liked this shot. Actually, I was really glad you included it because I liked the effect. It was graphic. It was interesting, visually different. And when I first saw it, I thought it was his eggs. And then kind of when I looked at it a bit more detail, I realized that they're frog eggs.
And
Um,
and I will just touch on what you just said about having an expert look at it. So we did a review, and I don't remember which competition this was, but we did an image review a while ago and there was a frog eating a centipede mid-water in a pond somewhere in Europe. And I called it out when we did the episode. And then I had a friend who lives in Europe and studies European reptiles and amphibians as a job, messaged me and was like, "There's absolutely no way this happened naturally. It just wouldn't happen. It wouldn't be there. It wouldn't be eating that. It wouldn't be eating that there." So I mean, it's a shame that those kind of things still get through. And again, I apologize to Tibor if this is not posed. But I think for competition's sake, maybe judges should look at those a little bit more closely, or like you said, have somebody in that field, take a look at it before, awarding it as the winner of
yeah.
a category in a major
Well,
competition.
yeah, I mean, I've certainly taken that on board with UPY. Is when we get these freshwater subjects, is maybe get someone with a little bit of expertise, just to say, we've got these 4 or 5 hanging around the potentials. Do any of them raise any alarm bells? It could be a
Yeah.
very valuable thing to do during the judging process. Right, that was an interesting discussion. Both about the competition, but about competitions in general and the types of images that appeal. So thank you for that, Matt. We'll be back again soon with another episode of the Underwater Photography Show.